Ray Everett, it is wonderful as always to see you. Thank you so much for coming by. Of course, Ray is our partner with expertise in executive compensation, governance, and I would say just an all-round expert on human capital, the future of work, how you approach your talent. So Ray, we're very excited at EMIR to be working with you. I think you bring a wealth of expertise. You're a fountain of knowledge.
Thank you.
Maybe we could start off where that knowledge comes from,
Sure,
and where does knowledge come from experience?
Sure.
So maybe talk us through the highlights of your career and some of the things you've learned through that. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks for the time, Trevor, and great to see you. So I did a master's degree in public policy in Canada. I'm hoping to get into government, and I did a little work in politics for a while. And then slowly got into consulting. I worked for Ernst & Young, and then as I did that, I really realized it was people that was the most important thing that as a consultant I could have an impact on. And then slowly got into compensation. And really through my career, I've had the opportunity to work all over the world. I was based in Hong Kong, London, the U.S. for a while, and then here really for the last 16 years, and helped build our businesses across the region. And ran part of our business globally for the last 3 years just before retiring. So, really, I think one of the things I've tried to do in my career is really to educate people especially in multinational companies, but also locally in terms of, what's different in different markets and vice versa, right? So what's happening for clients here, what's happening in the U.S. that's important, or what's happening in Europe that's important, and vice versa to an American company, what's happening in Asia, what's happening in South Africa, what's happening here, that they should be aware of, and make sure that they're being able to manage their people from a global standpoint, and because really, good talent is global. They'll go anywhere. See what's happened here in Dubai. I mean, it's amazing how many people have moved here, really since COVID, because they see the opportunity. They see the opportunity to create a great career, and it's an exciting time.
And you think Dubai now is a true global hub for talent?
Absolutely. I think when I first got here, I first started working about 18 years ago. I remember talking to recruiters and saying, they would always recruit from outside of the region. There just wasn't enough talent here. And I always thought that was kind of a strange answer. I think now it's a very different place. I think it's become a very attractive place for young entrepreneurs, young people who want to work, whether in a small company, startup, or even in a larger organization. And again, I think there's just so much going on. It's just a really exciting place to be. We were talking about, e-gaming as one small example, but I think there's so many different industries that people can really get into and grow and really develop. And, whether they want to do their own thing or work with the large organization, you've got so many different avenues to go through.
And when you look at what's happening around the world, places like the UAE and Saudi in terms of a growth opportunity, it seems that I know from speaking with global CEOs, there's a focus on this part of the world.
Absolutely.
And there's a focus on accessing and retaining the best talent.
Absolutely.
Now you're in a very privileged position to work with different boards and senior leaders. How should they be thinking about this? What is some of the advice that you would offer these boards in terms of their whole talent strategy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let me talk first, kind of think about compensation and then go into the broader HR strategy. I think there's many organizations that I've worked with who overpay people, many who underpay people, and many who do both. And really, if you think about what does that mean? You're not using your limited resources effectively. So there's lots of ways to figure that out, whether it's salary surveys that firms like Mercer and Aon and Towers have, recruiters who have a good handle on the market, and just your own HR department as they're recruiting. So one is, making sure you're paying people the right amount, but also correctly. And again, I think one thing that I've seen here and, work with a lot of organizations is what's called paying for performance. I'd say generally in this region, there's more kind of a socialistic kind of mindset to pay. And actually the current generation also kind of thinks that way a little bit. I don't want to get paid more than my colleague who's doing the same job. And I think that's interesting and it's a challenge, but I really think, in my career, the number of times I've had to say to organizations, look, you've got a very limited bonus pool or a very limited salary pool. You have to differentiate. You have to pay your best people. Otherwise, you're wasting your money, right? You want to pay your best people and motivate them. So I do think that's a huge challenge. Secondly, I think, again, one thing that we've seen really since the financial crash here is a really limited use of stock and stock options. To me, that is the best vehicle to pay people from two perspectives. One, for your senior executives, it aligns them with shareholders, right? It's the best way because it aligns perfectly. And then secondly, the market pays for the upside. You're not taking money out of your profit to pay people. It's the market that then is paying that upside. So it's a super effective way of paying people. So I've seen a lot of firms really, really stop using those types of vehicles. They'll use cash-based pay, good salaries, good allowances, but not things that are linked to performance and value creation. And I really think that's critical. I get, I'd say one of the least popular things I get is, the thought of paying an allowance based on family size. You're two people doing the same job. One single and one has 4 kids. You're paying them differently, but they're doing the same job. And that is, again, a mindset that's shifting very much still in the public sector, not so much in the private sector, but it is shifting to being more like, let's pay for performance and for the skills that the individual is bringing to the table as well.
Why do you think, you mentioned there that it perhaps isn't within the market here, it isn't so common or it's fallen out of favor? Why do you think that's happened?
I'd say it's always been there. I think allowances got built up over many, many generations here as a way of paying people rather than paying bonuses or long-term vehicles like stock and stock options. And it's definitely something we see much more in the public sector. And because there's so many organizations that have, public sector ownership or semi-public and semi-private, it's still in there in the works. Now we've seen, organizations going from having 100 allowances from, you want your book, there's an allowance for your book, there's an allowance for your cell phone, there's an allowance for white goods. A lot of those going away and just really having the basic housing, travel, and potentially the club allowances and things like that. But I'd say there's definitely a big change there. And I think just again, firms are saying, we're spending a lot of money, but we're not necessarily linking that to performance and the value creation.
So that's on the compensation side.
Yep.
What about the human capital talent strategy more broadly? I'm the CEO or the chairman of the board. What would you tell me how to think about this over the next kind of 24 months?
So again, I think, if we've learned anything from COVID, it's your organizations have to be flexible. I think, the number of organizations, not just here, but globally, that have said to their employees, we're going back to work. And the employees have said, no, we're not. and it's amazing. I mean, even firms like Goldman Sachs, where half their employees basically said, no, we're going to walk if not. So I think that's a huge change. It was probably going to change over time anyway. It's a generational change. But I think COVID really taught us that we can do that. We can work from home. We can be flexible. Even here, you think about trailing spouses, it's always been very hard for people to get a part-time job. I mean, crazy, because there's people with great talent, and now we have the ability to do that more. So I think that's something organizations just have to be really, really cognizant of. And again, you look at a board or senior management, they're typically older. They've gone through the, working 12 hours in the office, and they're saying, well, why can't this next generation do that? They have to accept it's different. It's a different generation. They want to work differently. Not that they can't be as effective, maybe even more effective, with the right, with the right guide rails. I think it's definitely a big change. And, I think about real estate costs and everything else that goes with it. But it needs a lot of management too. You want to make sure you keep, maintain, create a culture. And if you're not all together all the time, it's harder to do for sure. So it's not easy, but I do think that's the way organizations really have to start thinking about that. again, thinking about flexibility, you think about benefits. You typically get a medical plan, a life insurance plan, a disability plan, a retirement plan. If you're 24 years old, you don't care about a medical plan. You don't need the gold medical plan. But if you said to me at that point in my life, or to you, hey, I'll give you the bronze medical plan, but I'll give you an extra week off, sign up on that for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think that flexibility has to be part of the mindset here, and globally. And I think, certainly North America is leading the way in terms of kind of flexible benefits and things like that. But I think, that's something that really has to work here. And, it's just value for money. Why spend a lot of money on a gold-plated medical plan for a young professional who would rather have that in cash or in leave or in some other way that actually probably costs you less as an organization?
Can I put you on the spot here a little bit? Sure. Working from home, yay or nay?
Absolutely. I think people have proven that they can be effective, but I do think it has to be up to the individual, and I think people have to be able to. I think organizations again have to be flexible, and say, at least one day a week we're all going to get together physically in some location to help create culture, help make sure people get to know each other. During COVID it was easy because we all knew each other. And there were organizations making tons of new hires. We knew our clients, but trying to meet someone virtually in an organization and trying to create a culture and a connection with that person is very hard. So has to be some on-site, but again, I think flexibility. But I also think or individuals have to realize that depending on the company, there is a liability potentially. If they're not, some people are in the office 5 days a week, they're seeing their boss every day. Again, if the boss is from different generation, then they're there every day and they're working 10 hours a day, and you're in the office and you're getting to know them, versus someone who's in the office, probably not going to get promoted as fast, probably not going to get paid as well. That's just human nature.
And do you think they learn as effectively as well? One of our members was saying, she's the managing partner of a law firm, and she was saying this was kind of early days post-COVID when we were trying to go back and these decisions were basically being made. And one of the points she made, which I thought was very interesting, was some of the more junior lawyers didn't want to come back to the office. And she thought back to when she was starting out her career and how much you actually pick up and learn. You might hear a partner senior partner in the firm on the phone talking with a client, and they may say, oh, come to lunch with us. And how much do you feel that it's going to be at the expense of that?
Absolutely. No, that is a great point. I mean, I was telling you, I'm going to be teaching a course in international human resources at Cornell in New York this March. And, I think for myself, just thinking about that, I was trying to find academic work that I could, have as part of the reading process. And I thought to myself, geez, I never actually read a book about compensation. I learned on the job. I learned with great mentors who had been in their careers for 25 years. And that's how I learned. So I do think there's some way that we have to be able to distill that. And again, we've got the technology now where, some of that can be done in a better way, can be done digitally. Doesn't have to always be in person. So I just think that concept of flexibility for organizations really, is something that older people who are in leadership roles have to accept and have to embrace.
And when you think of the future of work, are you optimistic, pessimistic in terms of the complexity and challenges that boards and C-level executives will have to manage over the next kind of 10 or 20 years? Our colleague and fellow friend, our mutual friend, Dr. Noah Rafford was with me earlier, and he was depicting a future that was pretty scary in many ways, but we didn't talk about the future of work. So how do you see that over the next 10 or 20 years? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Will CEOs just inevitably pull all their hair out trying to deal with this next generation, or what happens?
It's a great question. I'm not a futurist, and I always kind of think that it's got to be a tough job to try and predict the future. But I think it's an exciting time. I think the young people that I talk to, are excited about the future. They're excited about, all the different avenues. You think about, what we used to call a career track. It's like a ladder, right? You climb up a ladder. And then I think now it's more like a climbing wall. You're going vertically and horizontally in different phases in your career. My own son, for example, he just started university. He's taking courses from digital design to how to laser cut something to a political course. Amazing stuff. And when I went to school, that wasn't the way I was taught. It was like you're gonna study one thing and that's it, and you're gonna be an expert. So I think it's an exciting time for younger people in that space. But again, in the work culture, it's not just working in one department. It's having a whole access to not just even the organization, but maybe many organizations, and really getting lots of project experience, lots of different experiences under your belt. So I think it's an exciting time. I think, people talk about AI putting people out of work. I think it's going to complement work. And it's not every job, but I think it's going to complement a lot of jobs and make work that much more interesting. Some of the more boring parts of the job are going away, and the more interesting one-on-one, again, think about a doctor. They don't have to do the research, the reading that they would have had to. It's the personal interaction is going to be the value. AI will help with the diagnosis, and then the doctor will be there to really help you, think about how do you solve your problem. A number of people I've talked to who've been sick, and the amount of time a doctor spends with them at a personal level is minimal. It's the diagnosis that they spend their time on. So again, I think things are going to change. I think that the nature of jobs are going to change and hopefully become more personal. Much more about how we work as people rather than just being very much technical.
And what does that mean then for building a culture within an organization, right? Particularly as we become more fragmented with more people working from home and technology and how all of this change and this complexity that we'll have to navigate. Building a culture, I would imagine, becomes more important.
Absolutely.
And more difficult.
Absolutely.
And if the next generation, it seems, tend to jump around more if they're not perhaps being elevated and promoted as quickly as they'd like, it becomes more challenging, right?
Absolutely. No, I think that is bang on. I think building that culture. I mean, again, I've worked with organizations where people who had worked for an organization that was long gone still talked about it. That's where they started their career, and many names come up as I think about that, and it's going to be hard to do that. I think whether it's in the financial industry or tech industry or any industry, people are proud of being part of a organization. So how do you keep that going in a more of a digital environment, more of a flexible environment? So I do think that's going to be a big focus for boards to think about. How do we make sure that culture continues? How do we measure that? So yeah, definitely lots of work there in that space.
Last question, last couple of questions, Ray. In terms of, you're in quite a privileged position. You deal with senior executives, with boards, and you get an interesting insight into what is on their mind. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, where we are today, it's a case of what is on their mind is shaping the workplace. It's shaping the economy. What are some of the issues, the events that is on their mind that they're asking for help from you? Because I think that gives us an interesting insight into what they're trying to solve, right?
Right. I think, again, you touched on, I think, how do I create the right culture? I think it's around, how do I manage performance correctly? How do I retain talent, the right talent, and make sure that they are motivated to work hard but still enjoy the job. And I think I was just talking to a colleague ex-colleague in Japan, and even in Japan where people would literally die at work, there's still a huge population that wants to work from home. And they're in much smaller apartments than we would experience here. So the world's changed, and I don't think we're going back. So I do think that's something that we just have to accept, and now it's trying to figure out how do we work from there, rather than saying, yeah, we'll go back to the way it was in 2 or 3 years. I just don't think that's going to happen.
And for you personally, to close the loop, you started off, when you think of those highlights in your career that you mentioned, public policy, and then, running very large organizations at a C level and a global, having a global mandate as well. The stage you're at now, you're doing teaching in Cornell. We're teaming up to support our network. You're doing some board work as well. You're in quite a interesting, privileged position in life.
Yeah.
When you started out your career, is this where you thought you'd end up? And also where you are now, having this, what I seem, when I talk to you, this creating this very nice balance of still having a really important impact at a high level, but then at the same time curating your life the way you want it to be. What's your take on that, where you are now?
Wow, interesting question. I was actually saying this to my wife when I was in graduate school. I was doing that. I was working on Parliament Hill in Canada for a minister. I was a teaching assistant, and also had some other things on the side. Couple of clubs I was involved in, and those are some of the happiest times of my life, because I was doing so many different things. And really over the last 20, 30 years, I've been doing one thing. Now, I'd say in a great way, though, because as a consultant, it's not every day was different. Yeah, I could wake up and it's not like I'm going to the office and spending 10 hours in the office. I could go in the office thinking I was going to spend 10 hours, get a call from a client, get on the road to Abu Dhabi, or get on a plane somewhere. And that was the exciting part about being a consultant. And I actually think that's the way jobs are going to be. They're going to be changing dramatically, literally in an instant. So I think people's job opportunities are going to be a lot more interesting than they were. It's not going to be sitting in an office behind a screen for 8-10 hours a day. I think there's going to be huge opportunities. And again, I would just leave the audience, and especially the younger audience, with the thought process of, always be willing to take that leap. I mean, I had amazing opportunities in my life. My boss at the time, I was in Hong Kong. He said, you got to come to Dubai. And I'd only been here once, and I was kind of like, well, let me check it out. And I came. My first day, I sold a couple $1 million in consulting, almost unheard of in our space. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so, take those opportunities when they come. And again, I think that's going to be the way work is going to be around. It's going to be much more project based. And I think for younger people in particular, it's, again, a very exciting time.
And we're very happy to be working with you, Ray. Always great to see you, and thanks for joining me.
No, I'm excited about the opportunity. And again, I think it's just, again, one thing, one of those things where I'm going to be kind of back to when I was at graduate school, having 3 or 4 really interesting things that I'm doing and that are complementary, but, different as well.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.